ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how. Hey there, Matt Petrowski here for ISO FileMaker Magazine. Find us over at FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video, we're taking a look at FileMaker Error Codes. Maybe you've dealt with them, maybe you haven't, but I'm going to give you all the details you need in order to work with them. Alright, so here we go. This is going to be a fundamentals video. We're talking about FileMaker Error Codes. Even if you're advanced, maybe there may be things in here that you haven't come across. But if you're a beginner, intermediate, and you haven't worked with FileMaker's Error Codes, we're going to be doing that. So I'm in a copy of FileMaker 19 right here, and I'm going to go up to the Help menu. Now, where we're going to find FileMaker's Error Codes in the first place is right here in the FileMaker Pro Help. Now, depending on the version you're working with, 16, 17, 18, 19, maybe it's higher, you are going to come up with this page right here. It'll look something like this. If it's older version, it'll say FileMaker right here. What we're looking for is FileMaker's Error Codes. Now, typically, the very first page, at the very bottom of that page, we have this link right here, FileMaker's Error Codes. If you do not find that, or if Claris has moved it, we can always go onto the side right here, and usually at the very bottom of the sidebar that we see right down here is this area, Reference, right there. And when we go to Reference and we expand that out, we again find within this area FileMaker's Error Codes, which are right there. So what I did, or what I've done for a long time, is I simply just take the error codes from FileMaker's help. Here in a Macintosh, what's really nice is if you use the Apple suite of products, such as Numbers, and I'll just show you an example here. We'll open up Numbers. There, I already have a document right there. I'll go ahead and get rid of that document. We'll delete that. I'll create a new one because I've already done it. We'll create a new document. Anything that you copy from Safari, if it's in an HTML table format, it comes over into Numbers, but you don't have to actually do this. I've already done it for you, and I'll show you where you'll be able to just copy this straight into your FileMaker database. I'll show you how. So what I'll do is I'll simply highlight the table right there. I'll just copy just that portion, come over here and paste, and lo and behold, it comes in our table or a row column format. So I'm able to then use some functions in order to format it into the proper way to get this into my FileMaker database. Now, whoa. Why do we even want this in our FileMaker database? Well, it turns out that FileMaker is only ever going to give you the number. So if there is no problem, then what you get back is you get a 0. A 0, which typically means false. Now, this is where we have problems with error codes. You think of 0 and 1 as true and false. But when it comes to errors, you want to know whether you had something happen, and the absence of nothing happening, or the absence of something happening, is actually a good thing. That means nothing went wrong. So when we get back a 0 or a false, meaning false, there was no error, there was no problem, then we're A-OK. Otherwise, if we get anything positive, or in this case, this is the only one, a -1 of an unknown error, anything else above 0, going all the way up to a really high number, we'll go ahead and get rid of this document, go look at FileMaker's help here. Anything going up to a really high number, as I scroll, you can see is basically something that went wrong. Now, as a professional FileMaker developer, I can tell you this. Most of the error handling that I do in FileMaker is simply just whether or not an error happened or whether it didn't happen. I'm really only interested in the fact that if something did happen in terms of an error, then I want to tell the user, hey, there was a problem, and just go notify them to that effect. Because usually those are things that you don't want to have happen. You usually want no errors. But there are some cases in FileMaker where you want to know or capture an error and take a different course of action. This is something that's going to happen within the context of your script. So you're writing a script, and that script is going to do something. Let's take an example that's super common, like finding records. If we look for a record and that particular record doesn't exist, we have one of two options. We can have FileMaker tell us something, which it will do in a dialog box, or we can take it upon ourselves to capture that error and then take that different course of action. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this video. We'll look at how do we capture this error And then how can we also give the user feedback about this error? So let's go take a look at that. All right, so we saw that we can take all of those error code descriptions and we can put them in FileMaker. In fact, that's what we may want to have if we ever want to show the user something that may be useful based on an error code. But the first thing we need to do is capture an error code, and that's all going to happen through scripts. In fact, that's the only way that we can really know that we've got an error versus we don't. Otherwise, FileMaker takes control. Let's take a look at an example. Let me see if I have this already hooked up. I'm going to turn this off really quickly. Don't worry, we'll be walking through this, and I'll show you what's going on. So, to get all of those error codes into FileMaker, what I did is I put them into numbers, and then I copied them into a FileMaker function. In fact, here is a link that you're going to be able to use, and I'll put this in the YouTube video description. It is over on github.com at FileMaker Standards, FMP Standards, and then there's this long thing that we're ultimately looking at a function right here of error description 19.fmfn, standing for FileMaker function. So you're able to use that link here. Hopefully it will not have changed, but ultimately all you have to know is just go to github.com/these two values right here, which again will be in the description in the YouTube video. Now, what we're looking at is copying this into our file. I have this right here. I could select all of this, but it turns out on GitHub, it's a little bit easier to just click this button right here that says raw. And what it does is it takes you to a plain window within your browser, which you can just click anywhere, do a Command or Control A, that will highlight everything. You copy this, and then you can go over to your FileMaker database. You go to the File menu, go to Manage. We're looking at our custom functions right there, and we select that and bring that up. Now you can see I've already pasted my copy of the function here in the FileMaker database. Now all this function does is it takes everything that we saw in that FileMaker help and puts it right here in the window for us so that we are able to use this within our scripts. Now credit to Dan Smith, he broke everything down into logical groups where you can see right here you've got errors in the 200 range, errors in the 300 range, and so forth. And what this does is it simply just makes the description of the error within FileMaker accessible to us. For example, right here. Now, I forget if I mentioned it or not already, really what it comes down to, for the most part, is we're either interested as to whether an error happened or whether it didn't. If it didn't, we're all good. If an error did happen, which we typically just don't want an error to happen, then we simply are going to show the user, hey, an error happened, unless we want to take specific action. So in order to take specific action, you have to know what the error code is that you're going to hit. You can always find out what this is within FileMaker by using the debugger. The debugger will tell you what's going on. Now, errors are an all or nothing solution. You're either handling the errors yourself or FileMaker is doing it for you. And sometimes FileMaker doing it isn't as attractive as you would like. Take, for example, I have a found set here of 2 records. Let's actually zoom in so we can see those. So I've got 2 records. I've got a Matt Petrowski, and I'll switch to the next record, and a Matt Navar. Now, obviously, if I search for Matt, I'm going to come up with both records. I get 2 out of 2. If I search for just a partial of PET in Petrowski, I get the 1 out of 2. But what happens when I search for something that doesn't exist? Bob. That is an error. And as you can see, the dialog that comes up is one that FileMaker controls. I don't get to deal with the icon. I have no control over the buttons. And basically, I just deal with what FileMaker gives me. Now, any error in all of FileMaker you can capture and you can handle as long as you are in the process of a script. Now, can we capture directly in browse mode? Sure we can. Can we script the process such that the user would be using a search button? Yeah, we can. So we would go in, let's say, create our button, and our button would be search right here. Now, this is a very explicit button that the user would have to click. In order to actually handle forcing the user to do that, I would, of course, have to go up to here and disable all of these modes. Now, in order to disable the modes, I would have to go in and change the menu system. And that would be going over to the file and going to manage and then going to custom menus right here. All of this, by the way, you can find the articles about these things on FileMakerMagazine.com. Are there other ways that we can hijack a particular mode? In FileMaker, yes, there is. And this is going to be a little bit of an extra. It's a little bit advanced in terms of using FileMaker's error codes to show my example here. But hey, I always like teaching you more about FileMaker Pro. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click here, go to Layout Setup, and then I'm going to go to the Script Triggers area where I have a number of options that I can use in order to take control over things. Now, there's a little bit of trickery in here in terms of what I'm going to be doing with the script, but as you can see, I can, for example, watch for a particular keystroke, and I can watch for it only in find mode by turning off browse mode. So that means that this script trigger, or whatever script is connected to this script trigger, will only work when I'm in find mode if I turn off browse mode. That's a key thing to understand about script triggers. But if you are using the on layout keystroke while you're in browse mode for other things, it's very difficult in order to mix the two, and you then have to put the logic within the script itself. I'm not going to be using that one, but I am, as I scroll down, going to be using this one right here of on mode enter. And you can see likewise it has these options of browse, find, and preview. They're all turned on, and I'm going to turn off browse and preview because I only want it working within find mode. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hijack find mode by selecting my script, and I've just named the script the exact same thing as the trigger. I should put on mode enter and put find, but we'll click OK and we'll take a look at the script and see what it does. It's a little bit of trickery, but right now we have a script that when we enter a mode, in this case find mode, in that script, when we enter that mode, we will use a FileMaker function to determine for sure that we're in find mode versus browse mode. What we're going to do is we're going to hijack the process in order to see the error code that is actually happening. Go into browse mode, and we're going to invoke the debugger. We can always find that in the tools. If you do not have your tools available, you're going to be able to go to FileMaker's preferences, which in the Macintosh are here on the FileMaker menu, and on the edit menu at the very bottom on Windows. And what we want to turn on is make sure that this is turned on right here. Use advanced tools if you have not turned those on in FileMaker. So we go into find mode. Well, let me open up that debugger right there, and I'll bring that on screen. In fact, you can already see on the window, because I previously ran this script, we have an error code right here, error code 401. Now, there's a very important checkbox that we can see on screen right now, and it is this one right here, pause on error. Now, as I've already stated, the only way that you can capture errors is within the context of a script. If nothing is going on and you don't have a script running, then FileMaker is going to handle the errors. So this is why we're using a script trigger of the on mode enter in order to capture that particular error. And I'll show you what the trickery is. Now, I can turn this on, and what will happen is every time that we're running a script, even if the debugger is not showing, FileMaker will come up every single time that it hits an error. That is a very key step to use and use effectively when you're coding your FileMaker database, because you will see a lot of different errors in a lot of different scripts, sometimes in places that you don't expect. And it's with that knowledge, that's when you can handle those FileMaker error codes. So we'll take a look at this. We'll go show our debugger, which I just have a shortcut assigned to mine here in the Macintosh. I'll go into find mode. Actually, that's was not supposed to happen because this window was active. This is probably not turned on for your copy of FileMaker. I run a plugin called the MBS, or Monkey Bread Software plugin, which does a lot more extra things within FileMaker. It's just part of my development environment. But selecting on this window now, having selected the window in the background here, when I go into find mode, we can see that the script trigger is invoked. You can see that the on mode enter is what happened. I didn't click a button, and the on mode enter script, as I've named it, is what's being triggered. Now I'm using a function getWindowMode in order to determine, am I for sure in find mode? And in this case, the value of 1 means that yes, I am. Now what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to step through this script initially so that we get to the point where FileMaker is waiting for a particular key response, because this won't really make a whole lot of sense, but let's explain it. What happens is this initially starts to run. Let's turn on my advancement keys right there so I can use my F6 key. It's always good to use your F keys up at the top of your keyboard in order to advance to this. This one step in the context of a script means, FileMaker, you are no longer going to handle things and show your dialog to the user. I am taking control as the developer, and when I get to an error, I'm going to see what that number is and then do something accordingly. So right after this step, FileMaker now has given up all authority and control to you as the developer. Now this is the tricky part. For me, it took a while to understand this, but I'm ultimately going into an endless loop until something happens. So I have this state right here, exit loop if the window mode does not equal 1, meaning if I end up in browse mode, I'm going to get out of this loop. I happen to know that I will get out of browse mode because by virtue of the fact that I've turned on the error capture, what happens is FileMaker, when I go into find mode, if FileMaker can't show its own dialog, FileMaker just has to do whatever the next most logical thing is. If it finds no records, then it has to show no records or a 0 found set. Now, this is a very cool thing because you get to do all kinds of things. We'll do something extra here towards the end of the video. So I'll advance this, which this will not be caught, and we will end up sitting on this pause resume, and we're sitting here indefinitely. Now, it turns out that a script, when paused, which we can always see right here, which I'll advance this, you may need to rewind the video, but what happened is right here in the corner, these items showed up. Now, a lot of the times in my FileMaker solutions, I am hiding the status bar. I'm taking full control over the UI. But if you're keeping FileMaker's standard menus and everything, then you will see this right here, and the user will have access to click these buttons, continue and cancel. But it also turns out that a button that will trigger this, the resumption of a script, is the return key or the enter key, which are two different keys on your keyboard, even if you have the short one and you don't have it on the extended keyboard. But at this point, FileMaker is just paused. It is waiting for input. So clicking over here and going back to the main window, I can type in Bob or whatever I want that will not turn up a result. But as soon as I hit the enter key on the keyboard, it will trigger this pause, or in effect, it will trigger this script to continue. So by continuing, FileMaker is now going to execute its find. So I have hijacked FileMaker's find mode so that it does not show a dialog box. I have turned on the error capture saying I am going to handle this. And we can see what FileMaker is going to do. Now, as a result of hitting the enter key, this script is going to continue, or the find is going to be executed. I actually haven't tried it with the lack of the perform find step, but I believe that I'm probably right. I have to have the perform find here in order to tell FileMaker to execute, because otherwise what's going to happen is FileMaker is going to end this script or go back to the top of the loop, and it will not be able to exit. Or actually, maybe it will exit. We'll try this without the perform find. I've always done it with the perform find whenever I'm hijacking FileMaker's find mode. But here in the window, I hit the enter key. We can see that the script continues. The script is now explicitly going to perform the find, which we will advance. And we can see right there, FileMaker did exactly what I was expecting. Number one, I got a 401 no records found. I also got a 0 found set. Now with this, we can do two really cool things. We can actually look at the error that happened and then take a different course of action, or we can simply just leave the user right here with a 0 found set. Again, Out of all of the different errors that there are, and there aren't exactly 1,700, the 1,700 that we see here. Let's see if going back will get me back to my error codes. So of all these errors right here, I may have mentioned it, there aren't exactly 1,700 because what happens is FileMaker, as new versions become available, some errors no longer apply to the new version, so they just sort of go away and they disappear. So there will be some skipped error codes throughout this whole list that apply to older versions, which in many times you need, which requires different custom functions, sometimes depending on the version you're working with. But for the most part, we're just trying to capture the error. So with this, we know that FileMaker has performed the find. It did it right here, and it's gone out of find mode. So this is going to catch, and it's going to throw us out of our script. So we're in browse mode now, and we'll advance this. It will exit the loop and thereby exit the script. So the script is no longer running, but we were able to fully hijack what was going on. So now let's take a look at how we take a different course of action based on the error code. All right, here we go. This is where you now have full control. And based on any error that comes up when we're using the debugger, if we turn on that little checkbox of pause on error, and when the error comes up as we're writing our scripts, that's when we get the opportunity to say, hey, I know what that error is, and I get to handle it. So right here after the perform find, which by the way, you do need the perform find. I tried it without the perform find, didn't record it, didn't feel it was necessary, but I do need to tell FileMaker, hey, execute this find, and it's the return key that actually triggers the pause to resume. But after the perform find, we're going to do what now is an absolutely common thing. There's multiple ways to handle an error. You can either say, I'm looking for a specific error, or I'm just looking for the fact that an error happened. So we can do this in a few ways. We can say if, and we can type in get LastError. This is the one magic function that handles all errors. Now we get to do whatever we want to do. I'm just going to show a dialog for right now. We'll put in a dialog, and I'm going to say, uh-oh, no records found, because we know that's the result. And we'll take off the cancel button right there. So this is what's called as general error handling. We are simply saying right after the find is performed, we know that an error 401 is happening because we looked in the debugger. But in this case, we're just capturing the fact that an error happened. We don't care what that specific error was. We just want to know that there was a problem. So with the problem, we now get to take a different course of action or show the user some type of response like this. So let's go run the script again. We'll go back into find mode. I won't invoke the debugger, but we'll type Bob. Bob doesn't exist. Because we have the pause on error turned on, the debugger comes up and we can see what's going to happen next, and it's our steps right here. So I'll turn that off, and I will simply dismiss this, and we get our dialog. No records found. And we're left on a 0 found set. Now that's pretty cool. How can we take this one step farther? Well, we can do the inverse, or we can look for the specific error. Heading back over into the script, we can say if the get LastError explicitly equals, and then we can put 401 right there. So now let's go and do our find. We'll put in Bob, and we get our dialog. Well, let's say that we are looking for multiple different types of errors. So we'll go over here and we'll say, uh-oh, 401. We'll change this to, let's say, 402. And then we could put in, say, else if, and we could just copy that same thing, get error equals 401. And we'll move this right here. So this is when you're dealing with multiple different errors. We'll duplicate that. And then here we'll put something like general error. Don't know what went wrong, but something did. So there we go. And put my quote and say OK. So in this case, what we're doing is we go into find mode, we look for Bob, we're getting explicitly our uh-oh because that was caught. What happened is it was not an error 402, it was an error 401, so we're getting exactly what we want. Otherwise, if some other error happened, we would get this one right here. So this is what's known as defensive programming, where you're saying, for example, if I get exactly what I'm looking for, I'll do this. Otherwise, if I get something else that happens, I'll do something different. Now, you can also do the reverse. So if I take these away and I flip this on its head, I can say, if I do not get an error. So in this case, what I'm saying, if there is no error that happened, then let's go ahead and show this. Otherwise, which I can put in an else, do something else. So there's three ways that we can think about our errors. We can think about them as a general error happened and I want to do something. We can think about it as a specific error happened and I want to do something specific based on that. Or we can think there's nothing that happened. I'm going to go this path. Otherwise, if something did happen, I will do this right here. So those are the ways that I think about error handling, and most of my error handling ends up taking the form of this right here. If I do not get an error, then let's go ahead and continue. Otherwise, handle the error. And this is where I typically, in my solutions, put handle error. Now, error handling is a completely different topic. You can go onto the FileMaker Magazine website, look for error handling and error trapping, and this is when you actually use a dedicated table and you go write the error, the number, the log, the description, and all kinds of other things. So this is what brings us back to that description. How would we use that? Well, let's take a look at that. All right, we've got our descriptions. They're in a custom function. All we have to do is get them out and display them to the user if we want to use that description. FileMaker's descriptions aren't always the most helpful, but you can write something that fits whatever you're looking for because you've already handled the error or you've already captured the error. So here we can see after we've performed the find, we can say if we get a general error or if we get any error, then what we're going to do is we're simply going to show a dialog. In this case, we know that it's probably a 401, and then we're going to simply show them the description, and we're going to hand them the error. Now, before I walk through this example, there's an important thing that I need to point out about error handling if you're going to start down this path, which is very valuable in actually any FileMaker database, unless it's just a super simple tool of a database. The important thing is this. When you are scripting in FileMaker, let's say, for example, I have a perform find and then a go-to layout right after that. In FileMaker, it is possible for many, many scripts to actually generate an error. So in this case, let's say I perform the find and that find generates an error 401. And then because of that 401, I go to another layout. And going to that layout, we go to a layout that for some reason that user or that privilege set does not have access. And the user can't go to that layout. It is inaccessible. What happens is FileMaker generates its error code directly after each step. That means that after this step, a 401 was generated. But after this step, a completely separate error was actually handled or captured. And it's a completely different number than 401. So in that regard, a good best practice is to capture or put any error that might potentially happen into a variable. So what we do is we set variable step, and this one, let's get my dialog a little bit smaller so that we can see what's going on. We are going to put in just the variable name of error, and our value is going to be get LastError. So by doing this, what we are doing is we are now saying a possible error happened. We're capturing it into a variable which we know will not get replaced because FileMaker is constantly replacing its get last error after each individual step that causes an error. So in this case, it doesn't matter whether we went to go to layout original, which is actually going to stay on the same layout. We're now going to reference our variable here. And if we say the exact same thing, if error. So this is the exact same thing minus this step, except it protects us in that if we had an error here and we captured it, and then if we had an error here, we are still able to do this right here. So if the error that we captured was a 401, and even though FileMaker's get last error now is supplying a completely different number, we have captured it into the variable, we've safeguarded it, and we're able to make determinations based on it lower down in our script. So that is just a good best practice, even though I don't actually need this right here. And now when we go into find mode and we put in Bob, we can see that we are getting our result right here. And something happened right there. Did you see what happened? Did you see that what we were doing is when our dialog run, there's a perfect example right there. I go into find mode. I know that an error happened, but I'm getting an error description of no error. Why is that? Because FileMaker had wiped that error from the find, but that by the time I got into my function right here, FileMaker's get last error is no longer showing the error because another step actually ran, or in this case, a step. So now let's pass into our error description the error that we captured. And we'll say, okay. Now we'll do our find and put in Bob. And now instead of a no error, which is 0, we get the actual description for an error 401, which is no records match the request. And of course, I can name this whatever I want, knowing that it's a 401. But you've now learned the key concepts in order to use FileMaker's error codes. You can capture them by scripting, just like you normally do, going into the debugger and turning on this option right here, pause on error. Every time that your script hits an error, it will show you the number right here. Every time that you need to reference that number, you can do it for yourself as a developer or for your end users. You have a custom function that will now show you the description of that error because you have put that directly into FileMaker within a custom function. So with all of that, what's my final tip for you and how you can actually use the nice little trick that we've learned here about going into find mode, capturing the error, and then not letting FileMaker show the dialog? Well, we get to show whatever we want on the layout, and this is the closing tip that you get. We can put on here just a plain piece of text and say, no records found. And we can do this in a really super obvious way. It's very rare that FileMaker has a 0 found set. Most of the time you find things, but when we have our error capture on and we allow FileMaker to give us a 0 found set, this is when we get to do the cool things. So I'm going to put a solid fill on this and I'm going to make it really stark, and then I'm going to go down and make my text white, and maybe I'll center this right here. So I get this really nice opportunity on my UI to tell the user no records were found. All I have to do is say this is only going to show when there is a 0 found set. How do I do that? Well, I go over here to the fourth area, the data tab, and we use the hide object when, and we say when get found count. And I believe what I'm going to do is inverse this, and we're going to go into browse mode. And there you can see right here, we've got a 0 found set. Maybe I don't do that. Maybe I go here and just take that not off. Again, just play with your logic right now, but we'll go see and do a find format, and there we go. So there's your trick right there on a 0 found count. All you have to do is go into that hide object when. You can put whatever you want on the layout. Just put just a plain get found count, which makes sense. A 0 found count, and that we want to hide it if it's anything positive, meaning we've got 1 or more records. And that nice little text will show up. And we are handling that right there. Turn off my pause on error so that we get the dialog and we get that you can do whatever you want. So I hope throughout the course of this video, you've been able to learn more about FileMaker's error codes, how to deal with them, how to see them in the debugger, and then take a different course of action based on any specific error code or just a general error and doing whatever you want. So much luck to you, and until next time, happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.